So you were there at the very beginning of Progress?
Yes, when I joined Manchester University, there was this character, Derek, at the Labour Club, who was larger than life, who just was the most energetic person in the room, and also the most controversial person in the room. And of course, 1992 was the year, my final year at Manchester. Labour was going to win the general election, and I was at the Sheffield rally, and we were all right with Neil Kinnock, and we very much thought, this is it, we've won. And the experience of not winning was just devastating, actually.
The Tories were in cars driving up the Walworth Road, chanting 4-0, 4-0 at us. And it just felt like all was doomed. So the idea of Progress came out of the ashes of that 92 election, really. The idea that, right, we're not doing this again.
We're celebrating the 30th anniversary now, but the germ of the idea was in 1995. We had to convince Tony of this, that this was a good idea. And he wasn't instinctively in favour. And that's because he didn't like Labour Party factionalism. Derek was a very dynamic force, sometimes a little misdirected, but always dynamic.
When Derek was asking me to set up Progress with him, I was kind of a bit suspicious, what's this organisation about? Where's the money coming from and so forth. But fundamentally, it was what I believed in.
I would say Progress was one of the foundational organisations for New Labour's victory in '97. Politics is about small numbers of people in rooms, ultimately, and Derek's genius was to be able to fill that room with the right people.
What Progress was doing politically, I think, was really important in freshening up how Labour did its thinking, how it presented itself, how it communicated and so on. Progress, along with other think tanks and organisations like the Fabian Society, did a lot to ensure that Labour had an agenda in 2001 and indeed in 2005 that was sufficiently fresh and different and innovative that we could say to voters, look, we deserve 4 or 5 more years in power. So as I say, you'd expect me to say this, but I think Progress did play a really important role in ensuring that Labour didn't just get into power, but that it could remain in power for what was, as we know, the longest period in history.
I mean, it was exciting. In some ways, there was a nervousness. I think kind of lots of people have spoken about the 2005 election, obviously coming after Iraq, and people were concerned about kind of, can Labour win a third, election victory? Kind of, it was unheard of. What I would say about Progress is, as a Jewish Labour Party member, it was always incredibly kind of supportive.
If there was an ethos that we were trying to get across, it was that this is a country that should be both ambitious and compassionate, but above all, Labour needed to set out and articulate a vision for what kind of change that meant, and to then grit the delivery of that change. So, we were deliberately setting out to build a project in which it was Labour that once again owned the future, and that just brought a sense of sizzle and excitement to politics.
If you look around the people who are the most impactful members of the cabinet currently, they really are from our cadre, whether that's Wes Streeting, whether that's Liz Kendall, whether that's Steve Reed, whether that's Johnny Reynolds. These are some of the Peter Kyle, Darren Jones, these are Rachel Reeves, a former vice chair of Progress. The best bits of this government are the bits that was trained and supported by Progress. We were the organisation that first said Labour was institutionally anti-Semitic, and it was. We were the people that stood with British Jewry and Jewish people in the Labour Party during that time, and I think we said some things that people really didn't want to hear but needed to, about how racism was manifesting in the Labour Party, and we didn't do that in a vacuum, but we did do it relentlessly, and I'm incredibly proud of what we did to highlight that.
It was about 3 months after Jeremy Corbyn had won the Labour leadership. There was a kind of a despondency, I guess, with Labour moderates. And I feel actually Richard Angel always thrived, I think, on galvanising people. And that was like his big main mission in 2016. So I was there during what I would say was like a really lovely period of trying to convince people to stay in the party and tell them about why Progress was worth being in and why it was worth fighting for. But you know, Alison McGavin was the chair when I was there, and she was just a constant support, constantly available, and made herself available, especially to the junior staff, which was such a gorgeous quality of hers and one that remains.
It was a tough time to be in the Labour Party, let alone work at Progress. You had anti-Semitism kind of rife across the Labour Party at that point. You had factionalism, you know, to the extreme. And, you know, it felt like it was so far away from any form of hope. And I think that was what was really special about the people that stayed during that time was, you know, whilst none of it seemed easy or none of it seemed kind of particularly full of glory, it was there because of a kind of true belief in the purpose of the Labour Party and what it could be. We were doing huge amounts in terms of stopping deselections. You know, there was a real, as I say, kind of factional war within the party at that point, and the view from the leadership was we need to get rid of as many MPs as possible. It was our job to kind of try and help, along with others, you know, as much as we can to stop any of those MPs from being deselected, who were great, hard-working MPs.
There is definitely a feeling within the Labour Party that we weren't universally popular. And I think the organisational success of Richard and Matthew in particular during that period destroyed really the best argument in favour of setting up a new party, because it made clear that the Labour Party was still the home of the centre-left in Britain. The Progress office during that period was a great place to be. It was a little attic above a clerical wear shop on Tufton Street. There was always people coming in and out. It became a kind of a good stopping place for any Labour MPs who would pop in to have a meeting, have a chat, and just wanted to kick about ideas that they might not be able to kick about elsewhere.
I was Richard Angel's third choice of intern, and it was the best third choice he'd ever made. We became a sanctuary for progressive centre-left thinkers within the Labour Party, particularly after 2015. It was such a hostile place for so many centre-left members, you know, the anti-Semitism, the kind of vitriol, the hatred within the Labour Party, and everyone involved in Progress from that time, from Richard, Adam, Connor, Steph and Nathan in subsequent years, should be incredibly proud of what they did at that period, because if it wasn't for Progress, a lot of people would have lost faith.
The guiding principle, I think, for going into 2020, into 2021, was actually how could Progress, working with Labour first and working with anyone legitimately in the Labour Party who was against what become the hard left takeover, how could we get them to come together to bury the hatchet where sometimes the hatchet had existed, to come together, to organise together effectively to ensure that we got a non-Corbynite elected as leader of the Labour Party. Whether it was 1994 or whether it was 2024, I think that people who support Progress have been fundamental to the victories.
Progress is one of the organisations in the party which is prepared to be radical rather than small c conservative, and for that reason I think it will always have a very strong and important role to play, an integral role to play in ensuring that Labour is not just a successful political party but also a party of power.
And I think what Progress did, and it did it in a supportive way, was actually hold a mirror up sometimes to the party.
Progress wasn't an organisation that was afraid of debate. We were willing to put ideas out there. We were at times willing to challenge the leadership.
Progress has always been pragmatic. It has not shied away from tough questions or pragmatic choices.
We helped recruit a new generation of people, and some of those that have come through in the party are part of that. We certainly trained up a generation of people, who many of which have become parliamentarians in 2024 in particular. If it wasn't for Progress, Progressive Britain, in those years, keeping people in the tent, creating ideas, organising in those local parties, we wouldn't have Keir Starmer, we wouldn't have a Labour government, and we wouldn't have the change that Labour government's going to deliver in the next couple of years.
Happy birthday, Progress!